What's going on, everyone? My name is Chris Dudo, and I'm the Goalie Gear Snob. And for those of you that may or may not know, I'm the Dallas Stars emergency backup goaltender, and I served for 39 of 41 home games for this past 2023-2024 season. And while I'm doing this intro right now, Rex is hopping around down here, so he might be popping up on video. But as I was just saying about the emergency backup role for this past year, I was at 39 of 41 home games. And for a lot of those games that I was at, I like to film a whole bunch of the different goalies and break down all of the gear that they were wearing. So I made a playlist of all of those games that I was at and talked about everything. But now what I'm going to do is basically a breakdown or a paint by numbers of what the gear they were wearing. I'm going to talk about the most popular brands and some surprising models that I noticed that these guys are wearing. So let's get into it now. So not only did I film those goalies this past year and do a gear breakdown and showcase that full warm-up, I did actually do a top 10 breakdown of my favorite setups throughout this past year, and I will link that down below if you did not see it. But now just getting into the numbers of everything that happened this year, I filmed 60 goalies, and I did just want to note that 3 of them were traded. That includes Spencer Martin, Capo Kakinen, and Jake Allen, but I did include them here because there were some slight different gear variations that those guys had. So I am just going to talk about how I labeled the pads by the brand and the model and then the core specifically, but it's kind of labeled by graphic first and then I'll denote the core. Same thing with the glove. I basically just went off of the glove graphic and then I talked about the core and the break. So say, for example, if there was like an L20.2 and there was actually, an L4.1 glove, they were each a 580 and a 600 break. I did just kind of denote that, they might have been a similar PX3 graphic or whatever, but I did just want to denote that difference there. Then looking at the blocker, I do have it labeled by graphic and then core. So that happens a lot with the Bauer gear, as we will get into. Then sticks were very hard for me to really just kind of break down the core of them. I mean, some of the guys' sticks I saw for sale on Pro Stock Hockey, Sideline Swap, whatever, and I was able to figure it out that way. But I'm really just labeled them by graphic and not by core because it's so hard to figure that out. So I'm just going to go strictly based off of graphic there. And then for pant, chest, helmet, and skate, I have all of that labeled as well. So pants, they're pretty straightforward. There's really no tricks there. You just have to be able to know, what the flaps look like and how to ID them. The chest protector, it is a little bit harder. I can kind of tell by that shape across the upper chest, but that category, please kind of take it a little bit with a grain of salt, minus one big stat we will get into. Then the helmet, again, pretty straightforward to kind of know the brands that we have there. And then with skates, I basically went to the boot, and if they had a separate holder, I tried to denote that, but I will get into that by brand as well. So let's get into all those 8 total categories. I'm going to go in reverse order from everything I just said and start with skates. So now we're going to talk about skates and basically how True dominated this category this year. So they had 47 out of the 60 goalies wearing True boots, which is basically 78.3% of the category. And you had 10 goalies wearing Bauer skates, which was 16.7% of the category. Then rounding up with CCM with 3 goalies wearing that, which accounts for 5% of the overall category. Interesting note on the CCM skates is that they are all different models, ranging from the Super Tax to the 50K to eFlex 6 skates. And then specifically with True, I did kind of break down the different models that they were wearing. So again, 47% of the category was True skate users. We had 13 goalies using True one piece. We had 9 goalies using the stock True 2-piece skate with the shift holder. So that's basically a real True skate. Then we had 22 goalies that were using the True boot with a Bauer Vertex edge holder on the bottom. So it did kind of lead this category more towards True, so they are wearing the boot, but you do have almost over half the category of goalies using a Bauer holder. So if we add those numbers in there, we're looking at 32 goalies wearing Bauer steel on the ice out of the 60. So that's quite a bit. Not necessarily as big as the amount of true skates that we're seeing, or excuse me, the true boots that we're seeing there, but it is an interesting note that I wanted to point out there. So now let's get into the helmets. Now that we're looking at the helmets, this was a pretty close race between Bauer's and Pro's Choice. So Pro's Choice originally used to have the Vaughn logos on top of it, and then a few years back, almost 8 or so years ago now, maybe 6 or so years ago now, basically Vaughn decided to pull their logos off of Pro's Choice helmets. Basically they go unbranded. But Pro's Choice is made by Dom Malerba, and it really kind of runs through Vaughn still, but it still is Dom's kind of separate build and everything there. So we did have 25 goalies using the Pro's Choice mask. We had 25 goalies using the profile helmets, and 2 goalies using the enemy helmets, which kind of gives Bauer the lead there for 27 of the 60 goalies wearing Bauer helmets and 25 of them wearing Pro's Choice. Then we had 5 goalies wearing CCM, 2 Wall Finland, technically the same goalie of Kakinen, but again, I'm just kind of counting him across the 2 different teams here. Pretty interesting kind of breakdown there that you had more of the profile versus the enemy helmet, but then a lot of Pro's Choice mask in there as well. So pretty much dominated by that category there. Now that we're moving into the stick category, this is another one that was pretty much heavily dominated by Bauer. So again, I'm just going based off of the graphic here, or the wrap that's on the stick. I'm not going based off the core construction and getting into that. You know, like example, like Jake Ottinger uses a Vapor 2X Pro stick, still wrapped in the Hyperlight 2 graphic, but I'm not getting to the full nitty gritty for every goalie there because it's very tough for me to discern that. But again, I'm just looking at the overall numbers here. So we had 27 goalies using a Bauer stick this year. We had 18 of the goalies using a Warrior. We had 8 using CCMs and 7 using Trues. Small interesting note there is that one of the goalies using the True sticks was Jonathan Quick, who at the time of filming was using True sticks but finished the season in Bauer. But again, I'm just going based off of what I saw and what I filmed there. So getting back to the Bauers, were 27 of the sticks, 27 of the goalies were using Bauer sticks. 17 of them were using the Hyperlight 2 graphic. We had 1 using the Hyperlight 1 graphic, and we had 9 of the goalies using basically a mock or a Supreme kind of construction on their stick. So pretty interesting breakdown there. Also, when we get into the Warriors, we have 17 of those 18 goalies using the RV2 graphic on the stick, and shout out to Peter Mrazek using the RM1 graphic. Within the chest protector category, again, this was a little bit tough for me to really be able to kind of figure it out. So again, please take most of this information with a grain of salt. Something I did want to point out in how I do my research here is, one, I do film a lot of the away goalies, so I get to see the white jersey. So sometimes you get to see the graphic through the white jersey if they do have a custom graphic or something kind of specially colored on the chest. Also, I do a lot of research on Getty images, and I try to figure out what they have hanging in the locker stalls, etc. So that's where I'm getting a lot of my information when it comes to this. But out of the 60 goalies that I filmed, I have 39 of them wearing the CCM Pro chest. A few of them wearing that 2018 model, a few of them wearing the 2024 model. But when you break it down, that is 65% of the goalies that I filmed this year were wearing that CCM Pro chest, which is pretty crazy to think about. Then we get into second place, we have Vaughn. They had 11 goalies using Vaughn chest this year. Very interesting, out of the goalies that I filmed, there were 6 different models that were being used by Vaughn. So I had a few, like Tristan Jarry wearing the V5 7800. I had John Gibson wearing his Vision 9500. Anton Forsberg using the VE8, which was pretty cool that there was kind of a difference there. Also 2 goalies using the LT98. So again, pretty interesting to kind of see that breakdown there. Then we're getting into Bauer, Bryans, and Kenesky. So Bauer and Bryans each had 4 goalies using their chests this year. All of the Bauers are the Hyperlight 1 because that is pretty much the maximum NHL spec you're allowed. The Hyperlight 2, from my understanding, is not completely NHL spec. And the Bauer Pro Series is a little bit slimmer than NHL spec. So a lot of guys, if they want to go with Bauer, they choose the Hyperlight. The original Hyperlight 1. Then we're looking at Bryans. We have a few Optic 2s and a few Optic 3s as well. And then Kenesky, we had 2 users still using the Kenesky. Also, interesting note, UC Saros was using the CCM Pro chest with Kenesky arms, but I snuck him under the CCM branding and kind of the CCM count there. So again, pretty interesting to look at that chest protector there with how much the CCM Pro dominated. If you didn't watch my 6-year review on the CCM chest protector, I'll link it down below now. Now we're getting into the pants category. So looking at the pants this past year, there's a lot of goalies that were wearing Vaughn pants. So the reason why 43 of the 60 goalies were wearing Vaughn pants is basically because when the original NHL spec pant came out, all of the companies had to submit theirs for approval to K. Whitmore. And basically, based off of how the pants were built, they all matched under NHL spec. It's just that the Vaughns feel a little bit bigger on the legs. So a lot of goalies that weren't necessarily wearing Vaughn pants before ended up switching over into Vaughn pants for that specific reason. Also, I know that Vaughn does a lot of custom modifications because they are still made in North America. Nothing against Brian's when it comes to that, but just Vaughn has a little bit more kind of a menu or spec option if guys want a tall top, if they want a solid back, if they want larger eyelets, if they want double flaps, if they want things shortened based off of their spec, Vaughn can do a lot of that there. So 71.7% of the goalies that I filmed this year were wearing Vaughn pants. Interestingly enough, 21 of them were wearing the Velocity version of the pant, and 20 of them were using the SLR3 version of the pant, and then 2 of them were still using the old Ventus LT98 model. Might have actually been the LT90, not 100% sure on the difference there, but I can tell it has the Ventus flaps across the thigh. So pretty interesting that Vaughn pretty much dominated that category this year, but I'm not totally surprised by it. In second place, you're going to see Bauer, where they had 8 different goalies wearing their pants this year, 7 of them using the Bauer Pro and 1 using the Bauer Vapor. Shout out to Elvis Merzlikins for still wearing that NHL spec Vapor pant. Then we have 7 goalies using the CCM 14A model of pant and 2 goalies using the Brian's Optic 3 Pro pant. So pretty interesting to look at that breakdown there. I know about 6 years or so ago, CCM pants were dominating that retail world and that pro stock world, but Vaughn has really taken over there. So pretty interesting to see that growth. So now we're going to be getting more into the visually and more easily spotted gear. We're going to be going with the blocker, glove, and pads. So starting off with the blocker, you're going to see True dominating here with 40% of the 60 goalies that I filmed using True blockers. Interestingly enough, there was a huge breakdown of different models that these goalies were wearing. So I'm going to do my best to break them down. So we had 14 of the 24 of them wearing the regular True PX3 595. Then we had 5 of them using the PX4, technically still a 595 version, so very similar there. I didn't see anyone using the new 615 model, at least based off the ones that I filmed. Then we had 2 goalies that were using the L20.2 blocker. We had 1 using the L12.1, 1 using the L4.1, and it was just really interesting to kind of see that breakdown across the entire year, kind of look at how different those True blockers and those True goalies are wearing them. Then when we get into Bauer, this is where it's going to be a little bit more confusing. So the way I tried to break it down was I kind of looked at the graphic first, and then I did some heavy searching to figure out what the backhand or what the back of the blocker looked like to try to figure out the exact model. So when I break down the Bauer blockers, we had 5 goalies using the ultrasonic blocker. We had 5 goalies using the Mach blocker, 3 of them using the Vapor 2-piece, 2 of them using the 2S Pro blockers, and we had 1 sole goalie using the Hyperlight 1 blocker. So that rounds out to 16 different goalies using Bauer blockers this year. Of course, they all had various graphics and other stuff on top of it, but really that's the core of what it breaks down to. Then we're getting to Vaughn, CCM, and Brian's, where Vaughn had 11 goalies using their blockers this year with 6 different models in total. We had 5 for CCM and 4 for Brian's. Again, I'm kind of counting Jake Allen in there twice, so technically 2 Iconics, but they just want to point that out there. But it's pretty interesting to see that breakdown of how True pretty much dominated that blocker category with 40%. And I'm going to be honest, they kind of did the same thing with gloves, so let's talk about that. When it gets into the glove breaks here, it does get a little bit hairy where it really kind of breaks down to different cores, different graphics, etc., etc. So there's a lot of different stuff here. But basically, we had 23 of the 60 goalies that I filmed this year were using true gloves. So that breaks down to about 38.3%, just shy of that 40% like the blocker. So when we get into the glove, I have 10 different models, which is crazy that's kind of how it breaks down. And something I did just want to talk about here is that a lot of people talk about how the 580s are basically dominating across, the pro goalie world. And that's sadly not really what the numbers are showing here. So specifically, I did just want to get into the fact that with true only, we had 7 PX3 590s, 5 PX3 600s, and 4 580 users, which kind of, had some different, kind of graphics, kind of different looks to them. So I'm just kind of grouping that all together, but only 4 true 580 gloves were being used there. So just a very interesting note that more people, at least more of the true users that I filmed, are really liking that 590 break. Small interesting note is that there was 10 580 gloves out of the 60. So it's very interesting to kind of look at that number, how there was, almost more 580s being used across CCMs and even some Bauers as well. But speaking of Bauer, they came in second place here with 15 goalies of the 60 using their gloves. And so when we get into the most popular models for Bauer, we have 7 goalies still using the Supreme 2S Pro. We have 4 of them using the Ultrasonic, 2 of them using the Vapor 90, and 2 mock gloves. So very interesting that out of all the Bauer gloves, there's pretty much no Hyperlight glove that I got to film this year, which would be the 60-degree break. So it was just crazy that I saw more 2S Pro gloves, more Ultrasonics, and all those. So just really crazy kind of to look at. Also, no shadow stuff here. Jake Ottinger, he's not using the actual shadow core. He might be switching over to that after he finishes testing some stuff up this summer, but he did not use the shadow core. He was just an ultrasonic guy on pad, glove, and blocker, so very interesting note there. When we get into some of the other brands as well, we're looking at Vaughn. They had 12 different goalies using their gloves this year with 9 different models in total, which is just crazy for Vaughn that they have so many offerings, so many different graphic swaps, so many different things that they had a lot of different options there. We had 6 goalies using CCM gloves, and we had 4 goalies using Brian's gloves. So now that we talked about the blocker and the glove, I want to talk about the pads. Just like the blocker category and just like the glove category, True basically won the goalie pad category this year with 41.7% of the goalies, or 25 of the 60 goalies, were using a True pad. And there were a lot of different core options, a lot of different things I saw, but the most popular one was 16 of the goalies I filmed were using a PX3 pad. A lot of those goalies did have a stiff mid-thick thigh option, which basically made it more like an L12.2, but trust me, it's not an L12.2 pad. True's making a PX3 pad with a different thigh option on there. Then we had 5 goalies using the PX4, 2 of them using the L4.1, that would be Connor Hellebuck and Marc-Andre Fleury. We had an L12.1 user in Joey Decord, the L20.2 user of Lucas Dostal. So it's pretty interesting to kind of see that there and kind of look at the big breakdown of those True pad goalies. In the second place here, we're looking at Bauer, and again, kind of looking at some of the kind of like, I guess, not really popular amongst the retail level. But basically, we have 7 ultrasonic pads that were still being used. We had 3 Hyperlight 2 pads that were being used, 2 Vapor Customs, which would be Laurent Brossoit and Connor Ingram. Their pads are kind of very unique, like very specific Vapor pads or Vapor core with different knee blocks, different strapping, very custom. So I'm just kind of calling them a Vapor Custom there. 1 Hyperlight 1 user and 1 mock pad user. Interesting note I did want to point out here is that Jake Ottinger was testing the Hyperlight 2 pads, and I did film him for some social things, but I ended up not posting any of that because he was hurt when he used the Hyperlight 2 pad and switched back to his ultrasonic. So at the time of the end of the year when I filmed the stars for 2 warm-ups, he was wearing the ultrasonic pads with a shadow graphic. And then also I did just want to note that Andrei Vasilevsky was wearing the Hyperlight 2 pad when I filmed them this year. And then after he got basically kind of didn't want to get pulled from that game, but gave up 6 goals and ended up not starting the third period. The next game, he switched back to his mock pads, and he pretty much never looked back. Very interesting note about Vasilevsky is that was the first time he actually wore a Vapor cord product since his inception of wearing the Vapor graphic and being a big Bauer goalie. So cool, interesting note there. When we get into the other brands as well, we have 11 for Vaughn, 5 for CCM, and 4 for Brian's, with the most popular for Vaughn being the SLR4, where we had 5 of the 11 Vaughn goalies wearing that SLR4. Shout out to Jonathan Quick for still wearing the V4 pad. So I did just want to talk a little bit specifically about some of the goalies that had different matching pad, glove, and blocker. Almost everyone had the same exact brand, but when it came to James Reimer, Eunice Korpisalo, and Scott Wedgwood, they had different gloves than their pads and vice versa. So Reimer had the Bauer looking blocker and pad, and then his CCM Axis 580 glove that he still used from Carolina. Then you had Eunice Korpisalo that looked like he broke out a brand new SLR2 glove that he was using with his PX3 pads and blocker. And then Scott Wedgwood was wearing his Vapor 90 glove, Vapor 2-piece blocker, and his true PX3 pads. So I want to get a little bit more into some of the other stats now, but that's a big breakdown of the pads. So let's talk about some final stats. I know this video has been a lot with numbers, a lot just kind of going over stats and other stuff, and I get that there's a lot of people that aren't big stat guys or whatever, and I totally get that, but I'm just trying to do my best here to kind of basically go deeper onto a lot of the content that I filmed this past year and help summarize it for you guys. So if you want to see a lot of the goalies that I have been talking about here, please check out the full playlist and go back and look at some of those goalies and look at what I was basically filming at the time. In the description of those videos, I do label a lot of that information. It's not as detailed as my own internal cheat sheet that I do have here, but I will be honest, I am thinking about publishing this content that I have, this Excel spreadsheet that I have, but I'm not quite sure the best way to do it. So please just bear with me and listen to a lot of these numbers and then go back and watch the full NHL warm-up, and then I'll try to figure out what to do with this giant list here. But when we get into a lot of the gear that you're seeing here, I did just want to talk about kind of like the paint by numbers of what the brands and basically their biggest numbers that they had across their categories. So if we're looking at who won the most categories, we have True that they won 4 of the 8 major categories with basically the most users in pads, glove, blocker, and skates. So respectively, it is 41.7%, 38.3%, 40%, then 78%. So out of the 60 goalies I filmed, that's a pretty large number that True had a lot of basically the wins in that category. But when you look at who came in second place with Bauer, they were represented in all of the categories here and almost were second place in a lot of those categories. So looking at my numbers in front of me on the other sheet here, it looks like Bauer was second place in 5 out of 8 categories and was represented very well in, basically where they were looking across the whole goalie spectrum here. So Bauer, they were 25% for pads, glove, 26% for blockers, 13% for pants, 7% for chests, 45% for sticks and helmets. So I'd almost argue that Bauer had a little bit of better representation across a lot of categories, especially when it comes to sticks and helmets and skates, that they were really doing a good job of being kind of holistically represented here. Remember what I talked about that Vertex edge holder? that has to count for something, right? So Bauer was looking pretty good there. But now I want to talk about the rest of the brands and Vaughn, Brian's, CCM, and talk about Pro's Choice. So when we look at Vaughn gear here, they were pretty well seated in third place here. So they did have a lot of goalies using their pad, glove, and blocker, which basically kind of rounds out to about 20% of the goalies that I filmed, which is pretty decent. So 1 out of 5 were wearing Vaughn gear. When we get into pants, that's where they had a whopping 71.7% of goalies using their pants. Then they had about 18% of representation across the across the chest. And then 41, almost 42% of the Pro's Choice helmets. And again, I'm looping Pro's Choice under the Vaughn branding because I know if I want to get a Pro's Choice, I can reach out to the Vaughn reps and help put me in contact with Pro's Choice. But it is just something I did want to call out there as well. We look at CCM and Brian's. Brian's was basically about 7% across the pad, glove, blocker, pants, and the chest as well. So it was very low numbers there, but I know Brian's is very niche, and I really like their build quality. Kind of surprised that not more people have started to switch over to Brian's, as their products are really unique, and I really like a lot of their sliding surfaces, and I really like a lot of the Iconic and the Eclipse gear. But specifically when it talks to CCM, they're basically the same as Bauer, where they are represented in all of the categories here. So they had about 8% across the pads. They had basically the same thing across the glove and blocker. Pants, about 11, almost 12%. Then chest, they had 65% of that category, which I think is huge for them. So they're very well represented across all the categories. And I know as the CCM lines progress, you're going to see a lot of good stuff coming out of them as more goalies are going to start to use the Axis XF Pro. You're going to start seeing more goalies using the eFlex 7 gear this year as well. So stay tuned for a lot of cool things that CCM is doing. So now that I've talked about all the brands, I want to get into one final statement before we close out this video. So now that you guys have followed along and listened to me talk at length about numbers of these goalies and what they were using here, I did just want to say a quick thank you for those that stuck through it and watched everything here and really paid attention to a lot of the gear that I was talking about and a lot of the cool high-level thoughts that kind of come along with this level of detail. So after I did film 39 of the 41 home games this year, I thought it'd be a great opportunity not to say that I am confirmed to be the Dallas Stars emergency backup for the 2024-2025 season. So I'll be doing 41 of 41 home games. So if you like the warm-up content and the gear breakdown content, you're going to be seeing a lot more of that, as I'm going to be doing my best to film almost all the games that I can. So hopefully by this time next year, I'll have a way figured out that I can kind of help break out my Excel spreadsheet and show you guys the exact models and makes that all these goalies are wearing. But I did just want to say thank you for those that have already been watching the NHL warm-up videos. So please don't forget to share those warm-up videos with those who you think might want to watch it. Please check out a lot of my social channels so you get to see specific clips and highlights from the warm-ups and the game that I am talking about. And just thank you guys for watching and of course subscribing to this channel as well. My name is Chris Dudo and I'm the Goalie Gear Snob, and I'll see you in the 2024-2025 season. Thanks for watching this video. I'd really appreciate it if you liked, commented, and subscribed, and also rang that cute little Liberty bell for some notifications about what I upload to my channel. Please check me out at some of my other social outlets. Are going to be linked down below.